Hello and welcome to the Reflective Coach podcast with me, Coach Luca. Over the last week or so, I've been reflecting upon the podcast, trying to share even more content with yourselves. And I thought, what more could I do to bring even more content and share the insights with yourselves? So now I'm introducing end of the month recaps and reflection points. So this first episode, or first reflection point as such, is going to be the reflection and recap point for October 2023. Within this month, we feature Marisa Kresge Serena, Jake Nannen, as well as Morgan Philliber. It's great to feature coaches from a multiple sports areas such as soccer and basketball. And whilst I was listening back to each episode and clipping bits here and there to prepare for this episode, or this insight, this recap, this reflection point, all of them touched upon energies, relationships, giving feedback to players, and giving feedback in an emotional state. So within that emotional state is when to give feedback and how. Are we on a high or are we on a low? How are we approaching that feedback? And is it going to be detrimental to the relationships and the feedback that we're going to give players in that period of time? So therefore that type of information is really important. When to give it, when to be selective, how we're giving information before games and after games, the state that we're within, how we're delivering it, building upon those relationships, and understanding each personality type of every individual that we come across and how they're going to take that information on board, as well as the importance of maybe utilising other staff within that process. It was so strange because I didn't set out to listen to any specific points about relationships from each episode. I just noted during each episode a reflection point or a point to go back to clip out for certain elements or content creation. And within doing so, to create this even further content and reflection point for you, it just happened to be natural that for every time I clipped something and every time I was putting something together, they all touch upon those elements and components which I've just discussed. So I hope you reflect upon this month with a lot of insights, and I hope that they inspire you even more to listen to the full episodes on both Spotify and YouTube. There is so much content within here, and within the extended clips, they're just touching upon so much which you can elaborate. So by taking a 2-minute clip and just by noting each point for me, there's so much within that. So then take that over a full episode, there is so much content within that which is really readily available to yourselves to act as a reflection point, learning, insights and experiences where you can really take that away. Anytime you can help the podcast by dropping a like, dropping a follow, dropping a subscribe and a comment, especially across all the socials, which include Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn and Twitter. You can also find it on Pinterest and TikTok. But it is at TRC Podcast _ on Twitter. It is the Reflective Coach Podcast everywhere else. As you can see, I'm Anthony _ Luca 96 on YouTube and Twitter. But by doing so, it really does help the podcast because there is so much content to share. I hope that this reflection point really does help yourselves and really gives you insights, and that you go and listen to these full episodes. But there is so much within just this reflection point, and there's so much that I've clipped that I hope you really do enjoy it, and I do hope that it helps you. There is a lot more up and coming, and I look forward to 2024 and what it is to bring you. But until then, we have a solid 2 months where there is so much content and information to share with yourselves that I'm really looking forward to it and recapping on what 2023 has been with so many wonderful guests and content shared with you. Please help the podcast grow. It is always helpful, and I hope that you're enjoying it as always and adding to your journal. This is Coach Luca on the Reflective Coach Podcast.
100%. And like we said, just that honesty is the best policy of making sure players maybe before season or in the summer know where they are. So, they can adjust their goals, they can adjust their work ethic and those areas of improvement that they need in order to be successful, while also keeping that in the back of their mind from the coaching staff. I think is a very important connection that needs to be stated.
And you touched upon it there, honesty and maybe that connection, but what other values do you have within your coaching style then, and maybe your philosophy?
Yeah, so within our program, within my own vision for what we want to do at a new spot, there's really those 4 core values that I hope to have, as well as instill with our coaching staff and players. And those would be our work ethic, our team unity, positivity, and resilience. We really believe that if in everything we do, we can be the hardest working team in the state, whether it's on the court, in the classroom, as individuals, that really lays the foundation for everything that we hope to become. And that's something we're constantly emphasizing day in and day out, is that work ethic piece, And for the time that we're together, always trying to find a way to get better. And with that team unity piece, of course, we want to build great team chemistry on the court, but maybe more importantly, we want to develop that team chemistry off the court and really build those lifelong memories together that will hopefully in turn make us more united on the court. So just that unity aspect of not just, the varsity team or the freshman team, but as a whole program, just being close and connected, we think can make a real difference in the long run. And with that positivity piece, what we mean by that is, that high energy, specific feedback to reinforce what we want to emphasize on the court. And I think there's a misconception that when programs are all about quote unquote positivity, that, it's all sunshine and rainbows. And that's just not the case. We can have that high energy and instill that confidence with our players in a positive way while still holding those high expectations and correcting things that need to be corrected. And we always like to say being demanding without being demeaning when it comes to that correction piece. And then, that resilience piece is huge for us as well. And a big piece of my coaching philosophy. Basketball is a long season. And we really believe that basketball is a safe avenue for players to work on those resiliency skills, whether it be after a bad shooting game. Maybe they had broken up with a relationship with a significant other. And really being able to instill that perseverance in these players where in life, there's going to be much more serious things that happen to them as opposed to having an off shooting night or having a turnover. So building those resiliency pieces not only are beneficial for success on the court, but also hopefully as players continue to grow and move on, they can take really all of those core values that our coaching staff has instilled with them to be successful as future careers, college, whatever their goals might be personally. 100%. And like we said, just that honesty is the best policy of making sure players maybe before a season or in the summer know where they are. So, they can adjust their goals, they can adjust their work ethic and those areas of improvement that they need in order to be successful while also keeping that in the back of their mind from the coaching staff. I think is a very important connection that needs to be stated.
And you touched upon it there, honesty and maybe that connection, but what other values do you have within your coaching style then and maybe your philosophy?
Yeah, so within our program, within my own vision for what we want to do at a new spot, there's really those 4 core values that I hope to have as well as instill with our coaching staff and players. And those would be our work ethic, our team unity, positivity, and resilience. We really believe that if in everything we do, we can be the hardest working team in the state, whether it's on the court, in the classroom, as individuals, that really lays the foundation for everything that we hope to become. And that's something we're constantly emphasizing day in and day out is that work ethic piece. And for the time that we're together, always trying to find a way to get better. And with that team unity piece, of course, we want to build great team chemistry on the court, but maybe more importantly, we want to develop that team chemistry off the court and really build those lifelong memories together that will hopefully in turn make us more united on the court. So just that unity aspect of not just, the varsity team or the freshman team, but as a whole program, just being close and connected, we think can make a real difference in the long run. And with that positivity piece, what we mean by that is, that high energy, specific feedback to reinforce what we want to emphasize on the court. And I think there's a misconception that when programs are all about quote unquote positivity, that, it's all sunshine and rainbows. And that's just not the case. We can have that high energy and instill that confidence with our players in a positive way while still holding those high expectations and correcting things that need to be corrected. And we always like to say being demanding without being demeaning when it comes to that correction piece. And then, that resilience piece is huge for us as well. And a big piece of my coaching philosophy. Basketball is a long season. And we really believe that basketball is a safe avenue for players to work on those resiliency skills, whether it be after a bad shooting game. Maybe they had broken up with a relationship with a significant other. And really being able to instill that perseverance in these players, where in life, there's going to be much more serious things that happen to them as opposed to having an off shooting night or having a turnover. So building those resiliency pieces not only are beneficial for success on the court, but also hopefully as players continue to grow and move on, they can take really all of those core values that our coaching staff has instilled with them to be successful as future careers, college, whatever their goals might be personally.
And I mean, a big thing, I've been asked to develop my coaching philosophy a couple times, like interview questions or just like people asking me like, why do you do what you do? And there's always the part of like, yes, soccer's there, like, but soccer's not why I coach. Like, I want to equip every athlete, student athlete, every kid that I work with the skills to be ready to go into the real world when they're done. I want them to be able to know how to handle conflict, because there's always conflict in athletics teams, whether we like it or not. I want them to be able to know how to communicate with a superior. So at this point in their life, it's their coach. How do they communicate with us when things are good, when things are bad? And there's so many life skills that come out of sports, and people sometimes forget what sports do for people. That's all I want them to do, whether they go and play overseas after they're done with us or they just go enter the real world and get a job. I want them to have the skills to be successful no matter what they do. So I've got to be willing to teach them through trial and success of like, this is how you do it and this is how you don't do it.
But for the most part, a lot of our players do lack a lot of, I would say, soccer maturity and intelligence. And so that's one of the first things that we work on in terms of foundations. I consider that being very important. It doesn't even have to deal with your touch or your shots or your passing accuracy. It just goes to actually understanding the game and being able to be an effective team player in a game scenario. Club level, you know, usually you're just tweaking a few things, like, you know, like getting your body over the ball when you take a shot, or following through on this aspect, or hey, you know, like if you're shooting, you get a better angle on your left foot than you trying to force it on your right. And so club, you're just tweaking. High school is really just a lot of development, and very rarely at the high school level, if you're working with a larger school and you've got more experienced players, you might be tweaking in that aspect. But for the most part, it's a lot of just soccer maturity and intelligence.
Yeah, we would agree. And I think a lot of times coaches get caught up with the development of the player on the court as opposed to the leadership aspects and the teammate aspect. And, you know, specific to the player development on the court, like I mentioned before with that strengths-based approach, we believe that if we can reinforce and improve those strengths as opposed to always pinpointing areas of weaknesses, we can see faster development. And I think it's important to give those areas of improvement in that honest, delicate way, but really give them only one or two areas of focus throughout an off season or throughout a season. Because if you give players too many things to work on, we believe in that philosophy of a master of all is a master of none. So if we can reinforce those strengths that we see again and again and again, and maybe focus on one area of improvement per summer or per year that player can improve upon, by the time we're finished with them through those 4 years of high school, they have become hopefully elite at their strengths, and they have hopefully slowly but surely improved about 3 or 4 areas of weakness that they can hope to improve on. And some ways we can track that is probably most importantly through season statistics, with pinpointing those areas that these players wanted to succeed in as an area of improvement, and hope that some of our small-sided games and training philosophy that we want to use does in fact impact that player's improvement.
Yeah, so the biggest thing, so interdependency is like a big concept within our program right now. Like, can you guys do things on your own? Can you figure it out on your own? So we have this concept, the rule of 3. So can you figure it out yourself and correct it yourself? So if you're the one mad or whatever, can you figure it out yourself? Can your teammate help you figure it out? So can they correct the behavior or bring the people and have them settle it out? But then the third thing is the coaching staff comes in and helps settle it. So at that point, it'd be bringing all the parties in, like talking it through, creating an action plan of like, how are we gonna like resolve this? I mean, at the end of the day, like some of this conflict that most college teams have is dumb. And they'll admit it like months later, like, oh yeah, that was silly. Like I was just mad at the moment. So a lot of the time it's just validating how they feel and validating that at that moment it upset them. And a lot of the times there's underlying things going on. Like they're not upset at their teammate, they're upset at something else that's going on. And they're using that anger out at their teammate or at the coaching staff or whatever it is. So a lot of the times it's just, can we get them to talk about what's underlyingly going on? I mean, conflict happens. I was on a women's team, like most of the time it's dumb in that I admit that now, like looking back at some of the conflicts I went through. But a lot of it's just like, all right, you're mad, I'm mad, we'll talk it out. And then 10 minutes later, we're fine.
But yeah, I would say like socially, emotionally, a lot of the players that we have aren't able to create these problem and solution-based skills or just having the soccer maturity that they probably should at the level of experience or the age that they are. And so I do think like soccer IQ and maturity has taken a hard hit. But for the players that we have, like we do have a couple that are, really smart, understand the game really well, but just may not be able to effectively have the skills to do that. Or we might have players that have a lot of skills, but may not have that social or that soccer maturity of like, oh, hey, this is when I should be doing this. Okay, this is when I should have looked along. Hey, this is when I should have taken my shot, or I should have found the slot ball, or should have had a cross instead of dribbling through an extra 7 players. But yeah, unfortunately right now I do have to do a little bit more of coaching throughout the game. I hope that's one of the coaching styles that I can change eventually. But for the players that we have on the team, on our high school team right now, and kind of what their needs are, it makes them feel more comfortable if I am continuously saying, hey, that was good, hey, this is what we're looking for, hey, next time did you see that person? And that goes with practice, games, watching film, just about everything. This generation really does need a lot of positive feedback or just like reassurance in a way.
Yeah, and like we talked about, that fine line, right? Of course you're not going to get upset with a kid for having a pop at school. I mean, they're young enough where it should be fine and healthy, but it's also not a crime to remind them of, hey, we got a game in a couple days. Maybe we could drink some water instead. Don't have to be super harsh with it, but just good reminders, because like you said, I mean, they're high school kids. They want to enjoy the snacks and they can afford to. And as we get older, we can't afford that as much because we start to see it in our body a little bit more. But I agree.
And when it comes down to those habits then, and obviously we want to instill them, we want to create them, how do we go about making sure that the players instill these good habits, or how can we support them in doing so?
Yeah, so the main thing for me is positive reinforcement. I mean, when you see something great that you want to keep happening, if you want to repeat it, praise it. I think there's a great phrase that is that exact quote of, what you praise gets repeated. So I think that positive reinforcement with specific feedback is critical to building those good habits, whether off the court or maybe more importantly, on the court, with being super specific with how you praise your players goes a long way, as opposed to, hey, player A, great job, way to work hard. Maybe you could be a little more specific and say, hey, player A, I really like how you got to the gap there on defense and stopped the ball with your body. Or, hey, player B, I really like how you snapped your wrist on that follow through. I think that's a big piece of building those daily habits and reinforcing them. And along with that, what you it's not what you teach, it's what you emphasize. And if you continue to emphasize those things that matter to you on the court and off the court, if you continue to praise positively what you want to see as a coach, over time, that's going to be what gets repeated. So I think that's important for us to keep in mind as coaches and educators to build those daily habits, is that positive reinforcement piece.
Yeah, so what we've created as a program is like star models. So we chose a US player and an English player, having a US and an English coach. That's just how we did it. People that idolized those positions the best, who did what we are looking for their players. So I think it's like anywhere between 8 and 9 points that we get for each players. So like goalkeepers, for instance, that's what I played. So I'm very like familiar with that sheet. And it's like being commanding and demanding of your box. And like, so those are things that we're going to look for in those players that we hope that they, when they're done with the program, those are things that are just like second nature to them. So those are like idealistic, like how each of these players would leave. But each player that plays on, say it plays number 9, yeah, we have this list of 8 or 9 things. We're like, yes, we want them to be able to do this. This is how we want them to like mold into. But they all have their unique individual ways of playing, and sometimes a 9 plays more like an 11, and they just like make it work as a 9. And it's one of those things we don't ask questions if they're producing the results that we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we deal with I usually just deal with the girls side, and so that is one thing I'm having to adjust to, because when it comes to soccer, I'm going to play, and if I need to, in college, you just yell at somebody and nobody takes it, no harm, no foul type of thing, but high school girls is completely different. I've had to change my coaching style just to, be a little bit more caring and reassuring and positive, and the soccer guy mentality that I might have on the field does not go with coaching girls soccer. So that's one big adjustment I've had to make. But as people get to know me, they know I just get heated, or I just get too invested and involved in the game, and it's revert back to the old ways. But yeah, this last couple years, has really changed players' mentality. So it's interesting to see when that goes back to normal or back on the rise, but I'm waiting for that.
Yeah, I'd say most of our game day rituals are solidified and they're routine. Typically we'll ask the players to get there however many minutes before the game to get ready. In the locker room, we let the players do their own thing. They're listening to music, they're getting mentally engaged however they like. And then we'll typically do a pregame meeting in a classroom or a locker room, depending on the situation, where we'll have different scouting report pieces, what we plan to do offensively and defensively, opponent personnel, keys to victory. But we also try not to overload our players with too much information on that game day. They mostly serve as more reminders, because things before that should have been brought up previously. And that is definitely more of a lock-in time that is coach-led, where we're giving them final reminders, we're getting our ducks in a row to be successful on the court. And once we've had that pregame meeting, we'll send the players out to their pregame warm-ups, where they can get their bodies warm on the court, get their mental game strong, and then we usually bring them back in about 7 or 8 minutes before we go back out. So we definitely keep our pregame rituals very routine, and although that may look different on a game-by-game basis, most players will know that routine. And after games, I am very big on keeping it short and sweet. Coaches and players are emotional, for better or for worse. We like to give them one area or reminder of positivity, and we like to give an area of things that we can improve upon, for better or for worse, and then we leave it at that. Because you know how it goes in the heat of competition. There are things that you just naturally forget, and they're, typically speaking, after a loss, it's never as bad as you think it is, and after a win, it's never as great as you think it is. So it's important to keep an even keel mindset after games, and then it allows you time to watch the film. reflect, take notes, before being a little more direct with what you want to emphasize the next day at practice, as opposed to making it's really a lose-lose in our opinion to have those long, deep conversations with teams after a game, win or loss. Because I'm sure you've been there before or after games as a player where, you're already thinking about the next thing, right? You're thinking about your after-game plans. You're thinking about how badly you played or how greatly you played. And we just don't find those after-game talks beneficial. We'd rather do some reflecting and get our own ducks in a row before saying something we wouldn't mean or might not be true.
And I'd even forced myself to be like, oh, I don't need to make this complicated at all, because they're still learning how do I dribble a ball without using my toe. So that's something that forced me to be curious of oh, I'm not 3 years old anymore. I'm 24 years old. Soccer, it's basic to them. It's just kick ball into net and that's the game. So it's exciting when I look at our team and I look at the 3-year-olds I worked with, it's yes, I can assume people would know things and they would know how to do it, but they're not always going to. And that's something we look for within our program is all right, you don't understand why we're doing it, or you want to know more about a certain skill, come ask questions. Obviously, there's an appropriate moment in time for questions and to question why we do certain things, but I want our coaching staff has decided we want to provide space for them. Maybe not in the middle of a practice or during a session or in the middle of a game, but come to the office after practice or stay later after a session and let's talk it out so you understand why we're doing it, or let's go deeper into it so you can understand how in different situations those skills will apply.
And I think it'll be good when you do get to that point and be able to then reflect and see that journey and that contrast in terms of that player, that person, the way they commit, the way that they're fully invested, that identity they may have, that resilience, problem solving, all those core skills that they may develop over time, and start to look at the enhancement of those levels, and therefore how that might adapt your way of coaching teams, or adapt the way you might do skill sessions with them, or look at the management and so on. So it's going to be interesting the way you do that. So over that core of the season and the way that you're planning for games, you're instilling sessions and so on, do you then look at programming in social skills or opportunities for players to make sure that they are doing things off the pitch whereby they're doing problem solving and team building, for example?
Yeah, I would say this season was pretty hard. We got a new coach, and so just trying to readjust, get him used to how we usually do things in athletics and how our schools usually ran and what these girls have been used to the last 3+ years. That's been a hard adjustment, so we haven't been able to have anything that's been coach-led in terms of activities or bonding experiences that the girls can have. Our goal this year, though, is to really include more. Usually when we have our away tournaments and the girls are away from home for a couple days, and we try to do laser tag with us and watch a scary movie together and allow them kind of just to hang out in their room, go out to eat before games or after games. That usually does help with a lot of the bonding, but our goal is this year is to start in the fall and kind of do some team-led things, hanging out with coaches in a fun environment, so they can feel that they trust us and respect us a little bit more. But yeah, I would say that players bonding and their social skills with each other just help in general, not even from them being friends and there's no drama or issues, but even just knowing how your friend or your teammate is on the field. I know that as a wing that my forward wants to receive the ball on the run and I need to put that ball in front of her. Sometimes I think we forget that, hey, they might want it at their feet, in front of the defensive line, and that's not their style at all. So even just, them hanging out and them talking more and seeing each other in a more friendly atmosphere does play onto the field, and they can kind of get a better judge of each other, and in the end of the day, they care more about each other on the field as well, and it's not so selfish type of mindset.
I think that's great, and I think sometimes, we might look for a selfish player because we want them to be the leader, we want them to go in and get those tackles, we want them to get on the ball a bit more. But I think being selfless and being that community as you've built on and keep saying the high school's about, having that sense of coming together and being tight off the pitch, I think is really important, because the moment you're not tight off the pitch is suddenly then when the cracks can start to come in. And I've seen it in teams that I've had myself, and you see a good core of players who are really pally with each other, they're going out, they're invited over each other's houses, and then you see the ones who have either withdrawn or don't want to be part of that, and then therefore off the pitch we're not as tight, and it then creates a dynamic then where there might be a little divide, and you might see this group over with each other and this group has nothing to do with that. It's difficult then when it gets to that point.
Absolutely, yeah. We had an issue at my college where we kind of had like our cliques that was more based off of our grade level per se, and we kind of see it at the high school too. But in college, our idea was, okay, like you've got one senior, one sophomore, one junior, one freshman, different positions, whatever the drill needed at the time. And so we kind of do it here too. We get to say, okay, like if you're going to do, let's say, warm-up touches, it's got to be a new person every single day. So we try to implement things where we get people out of their shells, or we match them up with people that they normally wouldn't be put up with. And even putting up our most shy and less talkative players with our very out of pocket and loud players that we have, or maybe our funny players, maybe to help them feel more comfortable, and even just our leaders, and trying to get them to ask them questions and trying to get to know them. And so we do try to do a lot of randomization in terms of our drills, who we let group up, who we let partner up. And so I noticed doing that really does help get players talking. And even after team dinners or whatever it might be, I might go in there and I'll ask, okay, hey, like we're all going to ask so-and-so a question that you get to know about them. And so when the coach and the players get involved, it kind of just helps, like, we're in this together, everybody's here, so am I, showing my face, and showing that I care. And so usually the players get comfortable very quickly after that.
My personal values, first one would be authenticity. So when you said it, I was like, okay. That's the first one. I am who I am. I want to enjoy the people I work with. I don't want to put on a show. You're going to get what you're going to get. Sometimes it's a fit for people, sometimes it isn't. And I think just staying true to who you are will help you along the way, even if some people, it's not the best fit for them. So definitely authenticity is my first value. Loyalty is my second. When I have people around me, I want to keep the good people close. I want to help others. I really value the relationships that I build with people. And the last one is I'm determined. I'm very competitive. I want to be successful. However, I define success may look different to me versus some other people. But I'm determined to find a way to be successful, to bring other people into it, to help them develop their own version of success. So those would be my three values that I really hold close to me. And I pride myself on representing and being every single day. Yes, for sure. And I think that's the hard part, because I came in and I am so competitive, and finding the balance of, well, how do you drive competition? How do you inspire people to become more competitive, to raise the level, when you can only control so much within your environment? How do you get people to take that next step when they don't necessarily know what it looks like? I think that has been a really big challenge of mine since taking over the program, just because it's a different situation than I've been in before. And with my personality being the way that it is, and their personality being a little bit different, it's finding that balance of, okay, how do I get them to, how can I create an environment in which they're thriving, in which they're becoming more competitive, in which they're raising the level on their own. But I have to teach them, and I have to structure it in a way that can get them there, that help with those small steps to progress towards that. We'll find a mix and a balance between the two. We do have access to a platform called Y Scout, so it does break down our games and give us statistical data within different thirds, within different phases of the game for each individual player, which is really nice. So the players have access to it, to see their own clips, to see their own game reports. Now, will we present that as a coaching staff all the time? No, it's too overwhelming for people. So I think you have to pick and choose what data is important to you and implement it at the right time. I think if you do it too much, it becomes just background noise and it's not as effective tool for learning as it could be. So definitely finding the balance between everything we want to do is objective. So there's no subjectivity to it. Okay, we need to connect more passes. How in depth we go into it will depend on the individual player and where our program's at with that particular team in that season, depending on what they need to be successful. So really managing the individual relationships, knowing the individuals on the team, and then knowing where the team's at as a whole dictates a lot of how we present the information, what information we show. Right now we're going through team meetings and we're trying to come up with just 2 key performance indicators that we want to be really good at this fall and build our identity around. So when you look at us, these 2 key performance indicators are showing up consistently. They're going to be what makes us successful. Could there be 8, 9, 10? Sure. But for right now, with where we're at, we want to be good at 2. And so then when we're looking at data this fall, we're talking about why players are playing or what we need from their role, what they need to get a little bit better at in order to prove their situation. Those 2 things we can fall back on and say, okay, this is who we are as a team. This is what we need from you. This is what it looks like. And for different players, it'll look like different things because you can go in a little bit more depth with somebody who's further along. Some people, they're not there yet. So you have to take a step back and you have to simplify it. And I think meeting players where they're at is how you get the best out of them. And it goes back to having those relationships to know the person, know what their strengths are, know how they need to be communicated with, know what they need in those moments from you. I think it's really about structuring and guiding the conversation. So you stay within your principles, you stay within your style of play. One year we might be a pressing team. One year we might be a mid-block team where we have to sit because we don't have those player qualities in order to be able to press in as many moments as we like. So how do we adapt? How do we change? But I think really highlighting your principles and having the players know what your principles are and then coming up with those KPIs that fit within the framework of your game model within the references are really important to us. So structuring the conversations, again, that communication, having those standards set. This is what we value. Now, giving them the freedom to come up with those KPIs within what the framework is that you've already set is really important. And then they come up with something not quite within it. Okay, how do we restructure it? How do we ask them questions? Hey, so you said this. Tell me how this fits within how we want to play. If we're in possession and you're saying this is what you want the KPI to be, okay, shots on goal, for example. Sure, we all want shots on goal, but are you just going to start taking random shots from, say, 30 yards out? Well, 1 on goal, so check. But that doesn't really fit within the game model. So really being specific and intentional with how we communicate with what we want to develop is the most important part, and how you structure and guide that conversation. It's the fun part because you never know what they're going to come up with or say. So then it's really being aware and having those conversations and being pretty open about it with what we want to do, what our team goals are, what our team intentions are tactically within those principles, and going from there. And I think that's the fun part about coaching. It's the enjoyable part. How do you make it work? Every year is going to present a different situation. How do you make the most of it? How do you create those environments and those relationships?
Absolutely. And earlier on in the conversation, you spoke about developing the program, which interlinks with what you just said then. So whilst you may have an outlook, say, for this year, but then maybe next year and so on, and you might have that short to long term thinking and then that strategy and big picture, how are you developing the program, and how would you like to develop that program then?
Biggest thing for me is establishing our identity and our game model on the field, and really having those principles be able to cater to a variety of different players. So we set the standard, their objective. We know what we want to do within the 4 moments of the game and on set pieces. On the field, really build that identity so that next year we're not at ground zero again. We already laid the foundation this past year. Okay, now how do we enhance it a little bit more? How do we integrate the freshmen right away to get that game understanding, to understand, hey, this is the expectation, this is what we want to do, this is how we want to play, this is who we are as a program, and build from there. I think you can find more success if you don't really have a game model or stick true to your identity, just because it can change so often. And you can maybe able to get more results that way, but I don't think that builds success long term. And that's something that I'm really looking to do within the program is build the foundation so that each class who comes in elevates the program a little bit more. We get a little bit more sophisticated year after year, which we can always fall back on and say, okay, this is who we are. You know what we're going to be coming into it. You know what the expectation is, the standards are, how we want to play. If you change constantly, you might have more success, but I don't know if that success is able to be sustained long term. And I think that goes back to the communication and the standards. Just really establishing those values and those principles. You're going to have to change. Soccer's not black and white like we spoke about earlier, but I think the more the players know the standard and they know what's expected of them and they know how we want to play, then that's when they have the foundation, they have understanding. Now we can start to make changes and more adjustments based on the opponent or based on the current situation of players or injuries or weather conditions, whatever it might be, that we need to change. But if you don't have that, I think it's really hard because now the players are in a constant state of unknown. They don't know what's expected of them. They don't know how to read the game. They don't know what our true identity is. So it's a lot harder when they make decisions because it's an unknown quantity to them.
And I love that state of unknown and that unknown quantity. And I think they're two key points and great to pick you up on because when it comes down to it, and a question which I was going to ask you, and which leads into nicely actually, if their players are going into unknown and they have quite a lot of anxiety levels, maybe that's stress, they maybe not understanding how they're going to prepare themselves, they may move away from the expectations we may have, and without setting these standards in this principle, sometimes we're seeing players come into the changing rooms or that match day environment, and we're expecting them to do certain things, but again, that's where the key of that communication, as you keep saying, is absolutely key. But we may be looking at it going, right, this isn't actually how I want it to look, but this is, and you may want to push it to those higher levels. But when it comes down to it then, as you said, how does match day environment look for you? How do you expect the players to come in? How would you like them to come in? And maybe how is match day managed for yourself and the program then?
I think that's a great point because the environment that I came from and my new environment, I assumed a lot of, hey, this is just standard. This is what it looks like. This is what they're going to know what it looks like. They don't know. When you change environments, they don't know. So the most simplistic little tasks that you expect from them, you have to tell them. Otherwise, you set an expectation, you think they're going to do it. Well, now you're disappointed, but you never set the standard. So I think expectations sometimes are unclear because it's more subjective. It's how you feel. It's what you expect somebody else to do. But did you ever set that standard? So I went back and once I realized, okay, we need to set the standard. We need to make it very objective for them. Say, this is what we expect. This is what it looks like. So now they have those reference points. Now they have the framework to say, okay, this is what I do on a match day. We will do a walkthrough. We'll walk through our game plan. We'll go over key ideas for what we want to see within the match. We'll ask players questions. We'll do the shape out on the field. We'll do a meal together before the game, when they show up, what time they should be going to see our athletic trainer to get treatment. Those are all things that we had to set and give them specific times for because they just didn't know. And it wasn't something that was done previously. So really being clear with that communication and really outlining the day and what the day looked like and what tasks they have to do was something that we needed to be more structured, just because it was different for them. And they do it, but now they know. So now you can hold them to that standard. When they don't know, it's a lot harder because it's just, you expect something and they just don't have any idea. So finding the common ground of, okay, hey, this is what we want it to look like. This is what we want you to do. We want you to come to the facility at 11. We'll be in our training gear. We'll walk through it. We'll do some shape afterwards. Okay, you're off on your own. Come back at 3 for a pregame meal. Okay, match is going to be at 7 o'clock at night. You'll have to be back at the facility at 4 to get treatment. So what you do in between then is on you. But really outlining it and being intentional with how you structure the day is really important, so that the players know, so that they can implement it. Yeah, and that's the goal ultimately, right? So that's hopefully what we're able to create out of it. People can take something away from it, and it might look different to every person, but that's the fun part of coaching and being in the environment and sharing information and sharing what we do, and hopefully inspiring others. Hey, you can take this, you can do this. It's going to look different, but finding your own way and your own path, I think, is key.
And I love that, because finding our own way and own path is absolutely key, because, sometimes you can have so many, different explorations, or so many people give us advice, or this is out there, that's out there. And suddenly our mind becomes fuddled, because there's so much actually in there and we're over-analysing it. But when it comes down to your coaching journey and you're currently where you're at, and say you were back starting out, and when you commenced this coaching journey, did you set yourself an objective in terms of where you wanted to go, or what you wanted to get at by the end of your coaching career? Did you set that objective as you started, or did you go along that own path and seeing where you're currently going?
Yeah, exactly. I think for me, I have an overall objective. I have overall idea of where I want to go. Now, just like my players, it depends on where I'm at my career. It depends on how I define success, how I redefine success. Because as you change throughout a coach and you change throughout life, it's going to change. It's going to look different. So I think just having an overall idea and then being okay with not going how I initially thought, or, you know what, I'm more happy going in this direction now, whereas I initially intended to go here, but that's not what I want. So redefining those success levels, and really being open and true to yourself within the whole process, and not just trying to follow a particular path because you're dead set on it. I think that's where people creates a lot of unhappiness, and it creates a lot of unmet expectations, and puts unintended pressures on yourself. So having that overall plan, I think, is amazing. That's what I need. That's what I want within my structure, but also being okay with, this is where I'm at. This is my new goal. This is my new intention. And being okay with rifting a little bit in order to create that success.
And again, I think there's an absolute key component there, and something which I'm taking away: unintended pressures. And that comes down to it because, we might take on so many different things. We might be spinning plates, as they say, or we might be over-analysing a situation, or we might be overthinking, or there's so much playing within our mind. But realistically, they are unintended pressures. So last week, I went to a live podcast event, and all I could think about was school the next day, and the teaching which I had to do. And I had, a more challenging lesson to deliver compared to the week before, because of the clientele. And I knew the clientele very well. I worked with them, and I wasn't too dysregulated because of it. But it was just playing on my mind more than I would have for usual. And I think that just come down to how I was thinking about how the dynamics were going to work, how I wanted the outcomes to be achieved, or how they were going to be presented, how the time was going to play out, how it would transition. And there's a lot which played into it. So whilst I was at this live event, my mind was literally wandering and thinking about this, and it was only until after the next day was completed, and I looked back and going, do you know what, I overthought about that, and the day was much better than I expected it to go. So therefore, those unintended pressures which I was putting on myself just by maybe having that anxiety, or maybe overthinking or overanalyzing the night before, took away from the actual moment that I was supposed to be in, and what I was supposed to be sort of analysing and taking away and having those outcomes. I was preventing myself because of this obstacle, which was being placed in front of me because of my own thinking pattern, and the pressures that I was putting on myself. So once you take away those unintended pressures, you refine, and you create that space to reframe situations and how you might approach it. It's actually going to be beneficial towards what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Exactly. That self-aware and self-perception of everything that goes into it. Yes, we all want to be successful. Yes, we want things to go smooth, and we want to have plan A, B, and C. But just being aware of the energy that you're giving off and the interactions that you have because of those unintended pressures, I think the more aware you are of it, the more you're able to overcome them or redirect in a proper way, rather than having to always look back and then reflect. I think that's kind of step one. And now step two, can I catch myself within the moment? And that's something I'm trying to be more intentional about, especially moving into this season. How do I interact? What is my tone? What's my body language? just being aware of it more within the moment rather than reflecting, did I handle that situation right? Why did I react the way that I did? Just taking a step back before responding, and kind of thinking about the things that go into it, and being able to adjust as you notice those small changes that may arise because of those pressures that you're under.
And I think that's important there because as much as it is about reflection and, time passes by, and a great quote from the live event that I went to last week was, once that hour has been lived, that hour is dead forever. And therefore we might be moving along through life, we might have a lot of reflections and we might get to a lot of points, but once that time has passed and we've moved on past those points, and we might spend then a lot of time reflecting. We might refine ourselves at a later age or a later point, and there's nothing wrong with that, and we're always continuously adapting and continuously learning. But being aware of it in the moment is absolutely key. And I think I've got to a stage now where I've reflected so much, and as you say, that body language, that communication, I take into so much consideration when I do something. And sometimes, I may have conversations with people, or I may just observe how they interact or how they may deliver something. And I'm like, this person has no awareness of the way their body language or what they're saying or how that may be perceived. And sometimes I can think of one person in particular, and I might have just cringed at that moment because they had no awareness within that moment. But I've got to a point where I'm aware, like, right, maybe just slow down, maybe just stop, maybe just think about this in different ways. So I think that's such a key point of being aware in the moment, to be able to adjust to those changes once we notice them. So I think that's absolutely key, and I love that because we spend a lot of time about reflection and so on, but I think being aware of it in the moment and just slowing down and going, right, in our own heads is going to be more beneficial.
Yep. I completely agree. And that's a daily practice. That's something you have to be very intentional about. And the more you practice it, the more you do reflect, and you do kind of give yourself cues or teach yourself strategies to take a break within whatever situation you may be in. Situation might be going fine, but take a minute to pause and say, okay, how am I reacting? What is it like right now to be either coached by me, to be in this conversation with me, just to kind of reshape, okay, I'm on the right track, or, I don't know if I like the way I just responded to that right now. How do I change moving forward? And really coming up with some of those key strategies to stop yourself within moments is something that I think takes a lot of time and a lot of practice, but something I am definitely trying to be more intentional about moving forward, because I think the best people, not just coaches or managers, are able to do that.
And I think that's great, because it is absolutely true, because sometimes you may see people or coaches or anyone that we may work with, or even see, for instance, they may say something, they may not even think about it again, or they've just gone out and delivered it and they've moved on and past it. But what they may have said may really resonate or stick with a player or a person for a long period of time. And sometimes we may flip back to periods in our lives and be like, why do I have this 30-second clip ingrained in my mind? And it's because of just something that may have happened and something that lives with us. And the person who may have said it or may have not intended it or may have intended it, they may be cracking on with their day and moving on and never thinking about that moment again. But we're resonating with that moment and it's still living with us, and we're still having memory captures of it, and it may not have any real true significance, but sometimes it might just play out for us. So I think that's absolutely key, because that awareness, I think, is intentional. I think it's a daily habit, how you develop that mindset, instilling those good habits and really refining what we do. I think it's absolutely key there, because sometimes we move on, and sometimes we don't try to refine ourselves, but refining ourselves is absolutely key in terms of that. But I think that, without asking what does reflection mean to you, I think you've summed it up naturally just by working out the way you're thinking, how you approach things, and then, as you said, creating those strategies. So you've already alluded to it and said how you're going to do it next year, and I think you've demonstrated what reflection is, which is great, especially for the purpose of the podcast, without truly asking the question.
I'm glad I could allude enough to it to make it clear. But yeah, I think that's the most important thing, and that's the fun part about it, because how I go about it, what I take away from you, what I take away from this conversation, and how I approach things moving forward, I think that really sets people up for success. If you're able to take one or two tidbits and implement it, maybe the way I implement something was a little bit different, but as long as I'm able to get to the end goal of being more self-aware, being more reflective within moments, and being able to impact the people around me in a positive way, I think that's ultimately the end goal and the key to all of this.
Absolutely. And whilst we're touching upon reflection in our times, what do you think your biggest challenge so far has been as a coach?
Definitely the transition as a assistant coach to a head coach and what the interpersonal dynamics and the relationship look like between the players. Just because of previous situations that happened within the program prior to me coming in with the head coach and player dynamic, and then now with me going from an assistant coach to a head coach, having a different dynamic and having to restructure those relationships. And what they look like, because at the end of the day, I am the one making the decision of whether players play or not. As the assistant, I always gave input, but it was never my decision at the end of the day. That wasn't my area of control. So now knowing what the players think, that they're a little bit more hesitant to come to me with things because I am that person in charge. Has definitely been something that I'm trying to rework and find what it looks like for me and find what it looks like for my players. Because what it looks like for me is going to be different than a different head coach, maybe in a similar situation. Just because of the way that I build relationships, the way that I interact with players and people around me. So that's definitely one of the toughest transitions, but it's an ongoing process.
I love it, and I think it's great because naturally I was going to say, did you always know that you wanted to be a head coach? But all throughout this conversation, I think it's come across as, yes, naturally you have, because of the way that you're thinking about it, the way that you're approaching it. You might have been on so many different training courses, you might have done all the studies, you might have read all the books, for example. But the way that you're naturally coming across and saying, how would I do this, or asking the key questions, or reflecting, or we're going to instill this next year, or being intentional, I think just shows how much of a natural leader that you are. And getting to that point as a head coach, I think was always going to happen anyway. But being that head coach isn't easy. It's more accountable. There's a lot more that goes with it. There's a lot more stress levels, or we might be committing a lot more time, or sometimes we may take away from the grass and doing the operational elements a little bit more. But whilst you're moved from that assistant coach to head coach, is that something that you naturally wanted to do, though? Or is it something which has been presented to you and now you've stepped into?
No, I've always wanted to do it. It was something that I've been planning for. Something that while I was assistant, I would take away things that I liked or things that I didn't like. Kind of reflect on, well, this is how I would handle the situation versus this. I wonder why they handled it in this way. Asking a lot of questions and trying to really take in all the information that I could within my specific environment and then outside environments of doing courses, having other mentors and building relationships with outside people. Just to be best prepared that when I do go in and I had a plan, I was aware of the direction and the foundation I wanted to lay for the program and how we were going to get there was something that I spent a lot of time doing. And I wasn't going to take the next step to become a head coach unless I felt like I was prepared and had that plan and had more of a framework to how I would approach things and interact and really build the program from the ground up.
And whilst we've had whilst you've had that big challenge, and whilst we're on a coaching journey, we can hit what may be low points, for example. And low points are something that are not naturally planned. They may be something which happens to us unintentionally, and they may sit and resonate with us relating to that earlier point. But whilst you've had, maybe a low point, or maybe the biggest challenge, or other little challenges which you may not have spoken about there, there's a lot of emotion that goes into it, and a lot of the thought process. And again, those unintended pressures which come into it. But what strategies did you have to sort of manage your emotions and come out positive and go, right, I can stop, start, and maybe go again, or I can move on past this situation, or I still want to be coaching in 5 years, so is this really going to have a significant impact on this? The answer is no. So how can I move on past this? So therefore, what sort of strategies have you deployed and getting away from maybe dipping into those negative emotions or slipping even further down the ladder in terms of that?
I think really, really the way that I have to look at it, the players and how I'm asking them to play and our identity. I knew going in and taking this job, they weren't going to be able to implement it as often as I would like. They just don't have the technical execution at that level, which is okay. But that didn't mean that I was not going to implement our identity. I was going to restructure what it looked like. So looking at some of those statistics that we could track, like how many passes did we complete? How many forward passes did we complete? Or how many were in the negative direction or backwards towards the goalkeeper? How many were lateral? Coming up with some of those key performance indicators that when we watch the match back and we could reflect on, okay, this is what it looked like. These are little wins. We might not have won in the result, but finding ways to say, hey, we're getting better. This is something we worked on in training this week. We wanted to force the ball central and win the ball back through interception, and we created 2 chances out of it. Did it result in a goal? No, but this is something that we tried to do in training that you implemented within the game. So really being intentional with those little wins and presenting them to the players to keep them bought in, and keep them seeing success has been one of the biggest things that's hard for me, because at the end of the day, I want to win games. I want to have those results, but we're not there yet. So how do we get closer towards getting the actual results that matter? And that's really coming through with how we want to play and finding ways to win within those moments, within our principles and within our game model.
And I think that's great, and I think you've got a great approach, and certainly what you've done there. And again, those key questions are absolutely critical. And I think for any coach or any professional listening or individual, if they just listen throughout this and write down a full list of questions, I think they've got a fantastic coaching portfolio to go away with and really implement within their coaching delivery and to utilise on. But I think those questions which you're asking are absolutely key, because whilst we're delivering, we can be setting out so much and giving out so much information and those objectives and relaying so much, but we're not actually asking questions. And asking questions can really help problem solve in certain ways. It can highlight areas that may need development. It creates those key conversations, and sometimes by asking those conversations we're creating more learning than by going, right, this is the set task for learning, and then these are the outcomes. And sometimes those questions can really lead to a great debate or a great conversation or great learning outcomes. But I think those questioning, as which you've been doing a lot of and really bringing into play, I think is absolutely essential when working with players and trying to find out more from them. And that's something which I'm keen on, and something which I want to continue to develop and take away in my own delivery. But I think what you're doing, is fantastic in terms of how that comes across. And you've learned a lot, you've done a lot. As you said, you've been on those courses, you were preparing, learned a lot as an assistant coach. But what has been the biggest lesson so far that you have learned as a coach?
That no matter what, at the end of the day, relationships, if you don't have a relationship with somebody, doesn't matter what information you have or what you know about the game, people are only going to buy into you and the vision and the program that you want to create if you have those relationships. So I think being intentional about spending time, getting to know people, and really putting an emphasis on that in order to get the soccer part and the performance on the field that you want, you have to start with the people first.
And I think that's brilliant, and that's a fantastic quote, and such a fantastic quote to really take away and finish on that episode, because there's so much within that, and there's so much which I've taken away from you, and now I've been noting as you've been speaking, because there has been so much which I've really wanted to delve into, and so much which I've wanted to pull out, and I think it's going to be great. And we're already thinking ahead of how that can be utilised in different ways. But it's been great to tap into your soccer mind, what you're doing, where you're going, how that may look next year, and for the season ahead. But it's been fantastic to sort of speak to you and get into that, and how that has come across. But I really appreciate your time, Marisa, and it's been great to understand your program, what you're doing with your players, how this is working, how next year's going to look, your own reflection style, everything that you're implementing, your game model, the frameworks, your questioning techniques, how this may play out with players, and just having multiple hats on, from podcaster to coach to a manager to maybe an analyst in my own head. I'm dipping into all these different hats essentially, but I think there's so much which you can really take away from it and think about it on the flip side of everything you said, because that's how you truly learn, and I think creates that overall big picture. But I think it's great, and there's so many different outcomes and takeaways from this which I know that I've certainly noted down, and certainly are going to be great for other coaches to learn. And as I said about that learning platform, I think there's going to be so much within this which they're really going to take away.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think it's always interesting because you kind of reflect and you take away, okay, well, what do I do? Why do I do this? And so I think just having this conversation with you has also helped me. It's helped make me more aware of, okay, this is why I'm doing this. This is where I'm going. This is what we want to do as a program. So I really enjoyed it. So thank you again for reaching out and for your time.
No worries. Well, I really appreciate it, and thank you very much for your time as well. And as I said, there is so much within this that I've taken away, and it's been great to speak to you. I'm glad that we could get this organised, and you're still earlier on in your day, but I hope you have such a great day and a great weekend ahead. But honestly, the time is truly appreciated, and it's a big thank you from me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day as well.
Thank you very much.
Talk to you later.
Yeah, talk to you later. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Exactly. And the players figure out pretty quickly what's important to you. And everyone wants to be praised, and everyone wants to feel like they're successful. So when you're using maybe a specific player as an example and you give that positive praise specific to what you want as a coach, other players see that. And not only do they want to maybe correct themselves to do that, but they hope to do that to get your positive praise as well. So I think keeping that 4-to-1 positive to correction feedback is critical, and building those players up with that positive reinforcement of those habits you want and combining that with that positive corrective feedback, I think is critical to that player's success. Because like we said before, being positive doesn't mean it's all sunshine and rainbows. There will be times where you have to be assertive and you have to correct players to do things correctly, but you've built that positive relationship and that confident player through emphasizing what you deem important.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely times I look back, even in my playing career and all of that, where I'm like, I should have done this, but I didn't. And I don't like that feeling now. I'm learning as I'm still young, like, if it scares you, you should probably go do it. And that was something as like a young 18, 19-year-old, I did not understand. I was like, ooh, that's a scary decision. No. But like now that I'm learning and I'm growing, like, yeah, fear is not something to be scared of. It's something that should motivate you. Like, I've got personal dreams of like running a marathon and things like that. Running a marathon terrifies me. 26 miles, that's way too much. Like, but I'm using that to be like, all right, you don't think you can do it, but you can. Just keep pushing. And so that's like how I look at with coaching. Like, it scares me, and there's the opportunity I might miss what I should go for, but I can't look at it that way. I just have to take every opportunity I can and know when it's my time to take that step.
Absolutely.
I think you hit the nail on the head right there of pre-game routines, and really just philosophy as a coach in general is the KISS method, which is keep it simple, stupid. There's also great terms that go along the lines of paralysis by analysis, or when your head's thinking too much, your feet are moving too slow, or whatever phrase you want to use. That is so true. I mean, I've seen some coaches that before games have the entire whiteboard filled with notes and information and plays and diagrams, and you cannot tell me that that is beneficial to anyone in any type of way. I don't care if it's Coach K, I don't care which is Coach Shudesky, who's the old Duke coach, whoever the greatest coach of all time is, whatever. I think that is never the answer to help your players prepare for a game. Because it's so true that if you're overloading those players, I mean, what pieces of information are they going to remember? And I think you really need to think about the most critical piece of information you'd like your player to remember, right? Maybe we're preparing for a game and, specific to a player's matchup, who they're defending when we're on defense. And yes, you could write a chapter book about all of that player's tendencies. Maybe they like to go right 73% of the time. Maybe they shoot 63% from 15 feet from the left wing. But, really, are 16-year-old kids going to remember that? Or is it going to be more beneficial for that player to remember, hey, the player I'm guarding is a really good three-point shooter? Or, hey, the player I'm guarding is a really good driver with their right hand? I mean, to me, that seems a little bit easier for players to grasp than all of those details that coaches might need to know, right? But really probably aren't that important to the player in order to help them be successful.
I'm in a weird time of my life too, like friends are getting married, classmates, like some are even pregnant and having kids, and I'm like, whoa, like my life's not there, and that's okay. Like, and I talk to them, and they're like, we both are like, that's just, we have our unique paths of life, and theirs, it was getting married and having kids early. Mine, it's not going to be on the same timeline as them. And when I look to like adding people into my life and like what my future looks like, they're going to have to understand that our timeline's not going to look like somebody else's. So it's definitely a weird world as a coach, is like, yeah, like this traditional life of like 9 to 5, and every night you like come home, make dinner together and do all of that stuff, coach your kids' soccer team and all of that, may not be what my life looks like when that happens. So it's a very weird world to live in, especially as a young coach, when family pressures and all of that, and they're like, are you sure? Like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen and how that's going to look. But at the end of the day, I know my timeline just looks different, and it'll happen when it happens. But I think when it does happen and people understand like what I do for a career and what I have to give up in order to have my career, it'll make it that much better.
Agreed. And you mentioned that, and I agree that it is a simple question. And I think the hardest thing for coaches to do is, yes, it's a simple question, right? What do my players need to know? But it can be oh so hard to execute in the grand scheme of things when there's so much to do and so much that you'd like your players to grasp and understand. The really elite coaches can take any concept or any piece of information they have, and they can give it to their players in the simplest terms. And that is also, albeit an easy question, it is so hard to answer, if that makes any type of sense.
Absolutely, it does.
If I can't achieve my goals and do the family thing, like I don't want it. And that's what I'm looking for in life, is like soccer and my career. Like, it's way more than a career to me. I've made it my lifestyle, and I want to add people into it that understand that, which is exciting. And having friends and family that get it, and they're not rushing me, and they're not adding those pressures of like family asking all the questions, that's exciting. And that's what I'm looking for in life. But I know everything will happen when it will, and it's exciting. Like, we have a pretty young, just overall athletic staff, so a lot of people that I work around get it and they understand it, and I have more people that I can relate to than I don't relate to, which is exciting.
Sure. So really, in basketball season, we'd say there's quote unquote 2 parts of the season. Typically, the first part of the season goes from the very first day of practice to Christmas break, which is towards the end of December. And then after that break, you kind of break into the second part of the season from January through hopefully March. So when it comes to those goals and those desired outcomes that we have, during the preseason, we will sit together as a team, and we'll go through outcome-based goals. You know, your typicals would be, hey, we want to compete for that district championship. We want to compete for that conference championship. Hey, we want to make that state tournament, right? But that can be very cliche and outcome oriented. So once we've decided on those outcomes that we'd like to pursue throughout a season, we focus more on how we can do that. And one thing we always focus on is game by game statistics that we feel as a program can help us lead to success. So yes, we lay out the desired outcomes, but we're focusing much more on those day-by-day habits and day-by-day processes that we can combine with together to reach those desired outcomes. And typically with those game-by-game goals, we focus on about 4 big areas on offense and 4 big areas on defense that we feel if we can be successful in statistically, game by game, we can improve. Game by game, once we accomplish these, it helps us be successful, and we can slowly but surely reach those desired outcomes. So I think those outcomes are important to have as realistic, desired things to achieve, but I think it's important to also think about the day-by-day processes of, yes, this is great. but what are some things we can focus on as a basketball team? What are some of those intangible things we can focus on for our team standards that will help us get to those desired outcomes? So just that delicate balance of the process leading to those outcomes, I think, is important to emphasize and can be very hard to do as well. Agreed. And, sometimes when you do list those outcome-based goals, there's going to be a lot of times where you don't reach those by the end of the year. And that's why we think it's so important to have those foundational pillars of what you want as a program to withstand that wave, so to speak. And like we mentioned before, that's that work ethic piece, that team unity, that positive environment, and being resilient. And I think once you've laid that foundation, you're more able to withstand the storm that's bound to come in a long season like that. And if you can stay true to that foundation, you can stay true to the rules, expectations, and standards that you have as a program, you can make it to the other side of that storm while still being intact together and still believing in each other. Because you're a fool if you think your season's going to go smoothly at all times. It's just not the case. We've been coaching long enough that we know something negative will happen. More times than not, multiple negative things. So being able to trust what you've laid down as the core of your program, I think it's important to be able to fall back on when the road gets rocky.